as an industry, we really are looking at, are we using them appropriately? And I'm part of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. And so I was on one of the committees there, and now I'm the current chair for that committee, which is the Pharmaceutical and Biologic Issues Committee. And so we talk a lot about stewardship. We monitor what other countries are doing, especially like the EU or South America, other countries and other continents. What's going on in the industry? Are there any regulatory issues downstream that we need to be worried about?
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest trends and issues from the best and brightest minds in the beef industry. Today, we are joined by Dr. Kevin Jacque, Assistant Professor at Ohio State University's College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Jacque earned his Bachelor's of Science and his DVM from Ohio State and currently works in a clinical role at the Ohio State Large Animal Services Clinic in Marysville, Ohio. I'm looking forward to a lively conversation about all the hot button issues in the beef industry today. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jacque. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are really thrilled to have you. I'm excited to talk about antimicrobial stewardship and I'm sure some really other important issues. But to start off with, if you could bring us up to speed on your background, how you got started in the beef industry and cattle industry, your career so far as a veterinarian. I touched on a very few high points, but I know that there's a lot more below the surface.
Sure. So I'm a cattle person in my background, but I started in dairy cattle. So I'm from a dairy farm originally. My family sold that when I was a kid, and I decided to go to vet school. And so I did undergrad at Ohio State in animal sciences, mostly still dairy kid at that point. And then I graduated in 2008 from undergrad, went right to vet school from there at Ohio State, and I graduated in 2016. And then I went into mixed large animal practice in Ohio for 2 years, and then mixed animal practice basically for 3 years in Northwest Washington State. And I was out there for 3 years with my wife. We moved back to Ohio in 2021, and I've been at Ohio State for 3 years now. And I'm doing mostly just large animal alone. I also teach senior veterinary students on our rotation here in Marysville, and that's a 2-week rotation. So every 2 weeks we get 8 to 10 new students. They're in their last year, and just trying to learn how to be a veterinarian for 2 weeks on a large animal side, ambulatory, mostly on farm. So it's been a great career. I got interested more in beef cattle once I got into practice, and I have a few cows of my own now. And our family, we have a little hobby farm, and when I'm not busy at work, we try to get stuff done there too.
I imagine the not busy at work time is not real abundant. If my mother-in-law veterinarian, who also is from Ohio and went to Ohio State University, as is my sister-in-law, there's not a lot of spare time for veterinarians, as I have learned. When you're talking about the 2-week rotation, this is kind of a tangent question, but when veterinary students are in their 4th year like that and they're going around to these clinicals, and you said you were taking, trips, you were like on farm and things like that. Like, is there any point where you have to like step in and say, okay, I need to handle the things now because this is a serious situation? Or is it pretty much they're there and they're in charge and you kind of like let them take the reins?
Yeah, we always try to get them to do everything first. And if they're having trouble, then we'll definitely step in, or we'll give them some guidance and then step back for a second. I would say probably 85% of the time the students are doing a majority of the work, and I'm just making sure they're doing it correctly. Or I'll give them some pointers, they jump in and do it, and then we'll go back and talk about it later. Once in a while, we get a really bad calving, or we're in a surgery that we thought was going to be routine that became complicated. We got to step in and do stuff, but it's not as common as you would expect.
That's one of the reasons large animal like surgeries and such are one of the many reasons I was a pre-vet for like 1 semester, and then I learned all of the intricate surgeries, and I was having anxiety thinking about holding the life of someone's horse in my hands, and I thought, nope, this is not going to be for me. So I admire those of you who can work under that pressure and take care of those, because it's a very, very, very important job. Um, I kind of want to dive into the topic that you had suggested. It's something that you are really passionate about and work a lot on, and that is antimicrobial stewardship, antimicrobials. Could you share a little bit, maybe some of the work you've done in that area, and why you think that, your feelings on why of that its importance?
Yeah, so we all use antimicrobials in our practice every day, and I've been exposed to them since I was a kid. On a dairy, we give shots of penicillin or ceftiofur if something needed for common ailments. But once I got out of vet school, I really started using a lot of antimicrobials just because that's the way we always did it. Was it always necessary? I didn't think so. And so as an industry, we really are looking at, are we using them appropriately? And and I'm part of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, and so I was on one of the committees there, and now I'm the current chair for that committee, which is the Pharmaceutical and Biologic Issues Committee. And so we talk a lot about stewardship. We monitor what other countries are doing, especially like the EU or South America, other countries and other continents. What's going on in the industry? Are there any regulatory issues downstream that we need to be worried about? And then are we providing enough feedback upstream to regulatory or to producer groups, industry representatives, so that we know or can work with them so that we still have access to the products that we need, but we're using them in a judicious manner, which just means we're using them the way they're supposed to be used or the way that they're labeled. If we're using them off label, it's by the veterinarian's directive. And then are there any areas that we can improve on, such as like, not using them for preventing disease if we can handle it, or are there areas where we can, reduce our use just to animals that are more risk than other animals, so instead of just doing blanket therapy or mass treatment? And there still are uses for those, and we definitely hit those all the time. But are there other things that we can do to prevent the use? So working on nutrition or stress or handling castration, dehorning, processing, all those other things that we do daily with cattle. Are there things where you can improve on those so that we reduce our use overall?
So I want to just like rewind just a bit, because for our listening audience, you're using the word antimicrobials. And for our listening audience who may not know the difference, if there is one, a clear delineation between antimicrobials and antibiotics. I think there's term differences possibly between, you know, the beef industry in terms of producers and maybe the academic scientific world. So is there a difference in those? Could you clarify that for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of us that are in the area of stewardship, we tend to use antimicrobial because it's more encompassing. That would include antibiotics, and then other products that would go along with those would be like antivirals, antifungals,
Oh, okay.
any other products like that. The majority of those are going to be antibiotics. So usually we just change it one for one as far as producers are concerned. But if you're talking about veterinary industry wide, we also consider those in small animal side to be antivirals, antifungals. A lot of those also have resistance too, or just don't even work. So are we using those appropriately too? And the term stewardship really comes out of like Middle English, I think. So 500-600 years ago, a steward was just someone who had a certain amount of land and you were assigned that land to take care of. But stewardship has evolved over time into being taking care of something that you're given. So that's what we assume when we say in microbial stewardship. That's what we mean. But for our terms, just antibiotics would be our main concern.
And so what do you say, like maybe you're on farm, and what do you say to producers or others who maybe have a stigma about using antimicrobials? Have you ever run into that situation where a producer says, I don't want any antibiotics for my animals? Like, maybe they have their marketing group or something doesn't have that. Have you run into that, and how do you handle that situation?
Yeah, so I get into that quite a bit, especially more than even when I was getting out of practice or getting out of school 8 years ago. Um, we had some producers that are grass fed or all natural product lines, and they want to not use antimicrobials unless it's absolutely necessary, and then that animal would exit that market opportunity. So that happens a lot. What we try to do is most of those things they can still use vaccines depending on the vaccine. We definitely look bigger into nutrition, genetics, and really, honestly, nutrition is probably the top one. And so I try to keep up on my nutrition guidelines and what's recommended. Are we watching trace minerals? Are we watching feed intake? Are we testing our feed, especially for cow producers? Are you even testing your hay crop every year? Are you getting a feed analysis on your commodities that you're buying? Are you balancing a ration, or are you just feeding what you think is necessary or needed? Those types of things is what we work on more if we aren't going to use or we're trying to limit our drug use.
So a lot of that sounds like what a lot of people would say like extension work, advising. So do you have you forgive me for my naivety. I've never been an associate professor at a vet school before, but do you have kind of like an extension type role where you go out and work with producers and talk to them about these things, or is it more like one-on-one when the need arises?
For me personally, I work directly with the clients that utilize our clinic, so I'm more of a one-on-one. But I have access to my extension groups both within our veterinary department, our veterinary school, and within the College of Agriculture here as well. So I pick their brains as I need to. But most of my day to day is just finding stuff out and helping my clients right away. But if I don't know, I send them to someone else because I can't know it all.
Oh yeah,
There's not enough time.
absolutely. It's we have a there's kind of a common thread of that. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert. And I don't know if I don't know the answer to something, I'll send you somewhere. I won't lead you
Oh
astray.
yeah.
So I think that's something that all professionals in pretty much all arenas are kind of used to doing. So, um, you were talking about your stewardship efforts and kind of talking to people about when using antibiotics and how we use them judiciously and when we can work around and such. How have you seen stewardship's efforts evolve over time? So, like antimicrobial resistance and stewardship has been a big topic since the early 2000s. And so, in your career and in your opinion, like how have you seen maybe those initiatives, but also like the messages surrounding those efforts? How have you seen those evolve over time?
They definitely have changed some. I believe that the beef industry overall has been doing a really good job on improving on our stewardship. We do have a lot of training programs out there for people alone with not only like BQA type programs, but within BQA, what does stewardship actually mean? What's an antibiotic and what's a hormone? What's an anti-inflammatory? Those kinds of things. Because some producers don't even know like the difference between like penicillin and dexamethasone. They're not the same class of drug. Like you use one for infection and one for inflammation. Those types of things they're still there, but I think they're a lot less than they used to be, courtesy of those training programs. And then overall, the stewardship hasn't gone away. It's not going to go away. There will be more restrictions in the future. The medical industry on the human side is really focused on having access to every single drug that they think is necessary, and that's basically every antibiotic on the market except for like
Right.
ionophores or feed grade antibiotics that wouldn't be used in people at all. Um, that's a little it's a little bit of a generalization, but that's pretty consistent on what they expect to be able to have on the human side. So it has changed some, but we are still doing about the same thing, pushing stewardship, but really looking at out of the box ways to improve that over time. I think because of the restrictions from like FDA GFIs, so guidance for industries, like the changeover of feed antibiotics to VFD status, and then water grade to prescription status, and then the loss of over the counter antimicrobials as of last year, that has really gotten producers thinking overall, what do I need to do to improve my management so that I don't have to, get a drug out of the bottle or call a vet to get a prescription again.
And management is a big part of it, as you know. But in the instance that management can't solve all problems, is there a situation where do you foresee a situation where management didn't address it and we need an antibiotic and there's not one available? Right? I guess you talking about the management and then also you saying that there are more restrictions coming have me thinking of the worst case scenario type thing in my head. I mean, do you foresee or can you share what you think might be some restrictions on more products or like which classes of products might be restricted or?
So a lot of the main ones that we have, like beta lactams, like penicillin, ceftiofur, ampicillin, those a lot of them the same classes are used in human medicine. So beta lactams are used well. The macrolides, they don't use the ones that we use as much in human medicine. So obviously, people know like telathromycin, which is original for Drax and other products like that. They're obviously not going to use those. They do use rarely some macrolides, which is a different class. There's just so many different kinds of antibiotics. We won't ever have an issue of finding one to use. Whether or not it'll work depends on the herd, depends on where you live, and it depends on the condition in the animal. Is that drug going to get to the right place at the right time for the right amount of time? So that's going to be the more concerning thing. What probably will happen is that we'll have to go off label if we do have an issue that's not being treated on label. You have to go to off label use. So it's called extra label drug use.
Mhm.
A veterinarian has to do that, or at least direct you as the producer how to do that. And it might be extending the label, increasing the dose, or increasing the frequency of giving the drug. And those things are very doable within our guidelines that we have for restrictions on drug use. So I don't think we're not at a critical point yet, but it's just something we want to keep an eye on, which is what our committee does. Other representative groups watch this as well. So we're fine overall. We won't be limited, into like three drugs. That won't happen. I don't think anytime soon at all, if ever. So we're okay on that front, but it is going to be a little tighter. We're probably not going to get very many new drugs. If we
Okay.
do, they'll be restricted only for animal use, I'm assuming. Um, but you never know. They do find out new things all the time. I'm not a research pharmacologist, so I don't look for those new opportunities, but I know there are people out there doing those.
Yeah. Oh, I had what I thought was a really good question as you were speaking about the antibiotics. Oh, it was about the off-label use. Um, so if that were the case and the veterinarian needed to prescribe it like at off label, is that something that has to be added to a VFD or like you have to have a new VFD for that? Like how does that work? Because we have VFDs here on our ranch and we take those seriously. So, in the event that there was some sort of enforcement around, like someone came to us and said we need to see your, all that. How does that work? Do you have to, I guess kind of rambling, but do you have to have a VFD for that? Or just the signature of your veterinarian is good enough? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I guess the first response is there's no extra label use of VFD products. So, we can't go off label for anything in feed.
Okay.
And that's part of that rule that started in 2017. I don't like it, but that's the way we have to do it. As far as water treatment, those are considered prescription products for antibiotics in water, and so they could be used extra labelly. It has to be directed by a veterinarian, and what the veterinarian has to do is determine a withdrawal period. And if they cannot determine a withdrawal period, then they can't prescribe it.
Okay.
So that's the biggest thing. Currently, the main organization, which is a group of really smart people, it's called FARAD. It's the Food Animal Residue Avoidance Database. It's funded by Congress, but it's a group of veterinarians and pharmacologists at different universities, and they're actually up for some more funding this year. So you can tell your congressman to please fund FARAD. It'd
Okay.
be great because it assists veterinarians on making these decisions on withdrawals, especially when it's extra label. So we really need that help. Otherwise, we're shooting blanks in the water here. We don't know necessarily how long to extend that withdrawal. So that's necessary for extra label use. But water and injectables or even orals could be used off label as long as it's not a restricted drug like our fluoroquinolones. So that would be enrofloxacin, danofloxacin, and naproxen, um, which are Baytril, Advocin, and some other ones and generics.
Those are the names I recognize. The shorter
Yeah,
one.
yeah. I try to be non-biased and use the molecule name, but
Okay.
yeah,
You'll have to not use the molecule name will only reach so many people. You have
yeah,
to reach
that's
both
true.
audiences.
So,
You got to use both of them.
right. So in food animal side, so cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, we can't use poultry. We can't use
Mm-hmm.
enrofloxacin or Baytril off label at all. It's only labeled for respiratory disease in cattle. And it has to be, if it's in dairy cattle, it's less than 20 months of age. On beef side, it has to be for respiratory treatment alone. And then Avicin is only for beef cattle,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to follow the label on that one as well. And then on like, especially on the dairy side, we use a lot of ceftiofur, which is Naxel, Xanil, Exceed, and the generics of those. And those cannot go off label unless it's directed by a veterinarian.
Okay.
So usually on dairy side, if it is off label, it's in a protocol, it's listed down, and it's signed off, and it has an extended withdrawal. So it'll be listed out. You have to withhold milk so many hours, and then meat we're going to extend that out another 7 days or something, depending on the drug. So that's all necessary for extra label use. Your veterinarian has to be in charge of that, and if they're going to go off label, they have to provide you a withdrawal, and that can just be in writing. It doesn't have to be like I'm going out and looking at this animal necessarily, but like if they've already seen it,
Right.
they say, hey, let's extend therapy. Here's the extended withdrawal. That would be sufficient.
Okay. If you could give producers, because you talk to producers on farm and on ranch about stewardship and using the right antimicrobial things, but if you could give our audience and producers like the two most important tips for stewardship and improving their management for decreasing antimicrobial use, like I put you on the spot here. I didn't ask, give you a heads up on them, but like, what are you, in your opinion, like what are the two most important pieces so that we can decrease our use of antimicrobials and not maybe be as less afraid that they're going to have fewer classes of it?
Yeah, I don't. Producers shouldn't worry too much. We'll still have plenty of drugs to use. But I think one of the first things I would do is try to create like a really generic protocol for if my calf has pneumonia, this is what I'll use first. If that doesn't work, this is what I give second. And after 2 doses, I call a vet or I consider other things, other therapy or culling or whatever. Um, and so protocols really, they don't have to be complicated. They can be pretty simple. It can be on a Word document. It can be handwritten. It doesn't matter. Just having something written down gives a really good breakdown of where we're starting from. And that could be for pneumonia or mastitis or diarrhea. And diarrhea is a little hazy because most diarrheas don't need antibiotics, but it's something to think about. If it's a really sick young baby calf, we're worried about sepsis. We'll definitely going to consider antibiotics at that point. But for your calf still in the cow running around, just has really loose manure, but still nursing well, probably not needed anyways. But just having a protocol, you can sit down with your vet, go grab a beer or something, and write it down over drinks or food, breakfast or whatever, and they can be pretty simple. I guess the second thing I would do is if you're having trouble, just call your vet and just ask them. I would rather get calls about, hey doc, should I use this drug or this drug, rather than, oh, I gave Draxin, then I gave Xanil, then I gave LA 200 and nothing's working.
Mm,
But I'd rather you call me before you gave the second drug, because maybe you didn't give the right dose the first time.
right.
Maybe you underestimated its weight. Maybe you didn't give it long enough. You didn't give it enough every 12 hours instead of every day, depending on what drug it is.
Yeah.
That those kinds of things I would rather get a question about. And those are probably some of the more areas that we could improve on, just following what the drug says or what we should be doing as far as using the physiology to our advantage.
So a flow chart. First one is basically maybe like a simplified flow chart.
Hmm.
And the second one is maybe following instructions and calling your vet.
Yep.
Cool. Those are, I mean, I think that we can all work better on all of those areas,
Yeah. Yep.
having plans and the strategy. So,
It's time for our famous three. Everyone knows vitamin D affects bone formation, immunity, and growth. What everyone doesn't know is research shows cattle don't get enough vitamin D. High D from DSM Firmenich optimizes health and growth with the more bioavailable form of vitamin D. And data shows high D fed heifers weighed over 8 pounds more at weaning. Don't let your cattle be vitamin deficient. Meet the growing needs of your herd year-round with high D. Learn more at dsm.com/hy-D.
we have come to the part of the episode where I ask the same questions of every guest. And for our listening audience, if this is your first episode of ours tuning in, I did give Dr. Jacque a heads up on these. So the first one he's not just having to think of them off the cuff. So the first question is, what is your favorite beef or cattle related resource? It can be a website or a book or a beef nutrition book or something like that. I've even had one person who answered that his wife was his favorite beef related resource because she managed the beef herd and he did like the data and logistics. So it's really open to whatever you want to choose.
Yeah, I would think my top resource right now for cattle would probably be the NRC guidelines for nutrition. So the Nutrition Resource Council for beef cattle. I think the latest is like 2000, early 2000s is when the last one came out. That one I use the most at the moment, just because I'm doing a lot of, are you even getting enough protein in these cows? Are you getting them enough copper? Are you feeding enough NDF, or is your forage actually good quality?
Mm-hmm.
Those things I really use almost every week, I think. So that's a really good resource right now on the cattle side.
So you might think this is I find this really funny, but you may not. But like last week, my guest said the exact same book. Like that was his answer. So, and I know that my husband, who sits right around the corner here in I sit in like the closet of our shared home office. He is a swine nutritionist and he has the swine one on his desk. And I know that because I bought that for Christmas one year because he asked for it. So it's a popular series of books for academics and animal scientists. Okay, so the next question, changing track here and staying in the book, but different subject, is what is your favorite non-beef or cattle related book or one you're currently reading? So maybe it's not your favorite book, but it's one that you're in the middle of right now.
I try to read novels, but I only get through like 3 a year because there's really not a lot of time. I probably listen to more podcasts or YouTube or something.
Mm-hmm.
I recently reread a book from my childhood called The Wind in the Willows. It's an early 1900s novel.
I've read that.
I like some, pretty light reading. It's really fun to get through. I'd have to counter that with All Creatures Great and Small. James Herriot books are really great. They're really funny because you can compare and contrast from what we do today and what they did almost 100 years ago now. Those are probably, I'd have to pick two. So those two for now. Yeah.
That's fine. I'll give you two. That's fine. So, thank you. That's good. I remember reading The Wind in the Willows
Mm-hmm.
long ago. I do not remember what it's about at all, but I do remember the title and that I did read that when I was younger. Okay. And so the last one is, when you think of someone you admire or look up to, what is a characteristic they possess that has led them to be successful?
There are a lot of great mentors out there for me. The best ones, I think, are ones that just stopped and listened to me, because a lot of them were great at doing their job, but they didn't have time or didn't want to take or make time for listening. I think the ones that really listened to what I had to ask and thought about it before they just responded with a blank answer or a repetitive answer, they're the best people to talk to. I try to be a listener myself because of that, and otherwise I'm just spitting out knowledge, and my clients could care less how much I know until they know how much I care. So just listening.
That's very true. When I in a previous role or like job, that was something that we shared with beef producers, was that your consumers don't care about how much you know until they know that you care about them and about your animals. And so I really love that you just said that. That was a nice full circle. So, well, that's all the questions that I have today. I really appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Jacque. Do you have anything that you'd like to add that I didn't ask you, is there some burning thing that you really want to share with our audience before we sign off?
Yeah, if you're using antibiotics, just call your vet if you ever have a question. They're always happy to help or answer questions. You can follow AABP on all the social media. We try to keep things updated there. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and that's an easy place to find me.
So I'm going to put, for our audience, I'm going to put that you can follow Dr. Jacque on LinkedIn, and that you can also follow the AABP on all social media. And so that's the American Association of Bovine Practitioners on the various social media outlets. Okay, well, thank you again, Dr. Jacque. I'm just putting this in the show notes. Thank you again, Dr. Jacque. It was nice to talk to you. I always enjoyed speaking about what I call like crossover issues that things like those of us who work with consumers and talk with consumers also have to. It's a topic that also affects you as a veterinarian and that also as a beef producer. So I enjoy speaking about those issues. So thank you for being here. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. And we'll meet you back here next week on the Beef Podcast.